The Corvette was the color of deep ocean water, the particular shade of dark blue that changes in different light, going almost black in shadow and electric at the edges when the sun catches it directly. It sat at the curb on Meridian Avenue with its engine ticking quietly in the way engines tick after a long drive when the metal is still contracting back to itself. The rear window carried a paper dealer plate from Hargrove Certified Motors, the kind printed on cardstock with a temporary registration number in the lower corner and a 30-day validity window. Isaiah James Whitfield was 16 years old. He was sitting in the driver's seat with the window down and his right arm resting on the door sill in the careful, deliberate way of someone who has just been given permission to do something he has wanted to do for years and is not going to waste a single second of the experience by doing it incorrectly. He had dark eyes and his mother's cheekbones and hands that were slightly too large for his age, the hands of a person who was going to be taller than he currently was. He wore a clean white shirt and dark jeans, and the laces on his sneakers were tied with the precision of someone whose grandmother had told him that a man who can't be bothered to tie his shoes correctly can't be bothered about much else. He was not driving, he was sitting, the engine was off. He was waiting for his uncle. His uncle Devin Whitfield was 43 years old. Devin was the reason Isaiah was sitting in a Corvette on Meridian Avenue on a Saturday morning. Devin was the reason for many good things in Isaiah's life, in the way that a certain kind of uncle becomes a certain kind of thing for a certain kind of kid. Not a substitute for a father, because Isaiah had a father. Robert Whitfield, who worked construction and came home at 6:30 every evening and helped with the homework, and showed up for every school event and was entirely present. But an addition. A supplementary frequency. Someone who saw you slightly differently than the people who lived with you because they came from outside the daily proximity and therefore noticed things the daily proximity obscures. Devin had bought the Corvette 3 months ago. He was a civil engineer, 11 years in private practice with a firm he had started at 31, and that employed 16 people. He had wanted a Corvette since he was 12 years old, and had decided at 42 that there was no further argument against buying one. He had driven it off the lot at Hargrove Certified Motors on a Tuesday afternoon and had called Isaiah from the parking lot to describe it in enough detail that Isaiah had said, "Uncle Devin, when can I sit in it?" Devin had said Saturday. It was Saturday. The relationship between Isaiah and Devin was the kind that takes years to build and cannot be fully explained to anyone who did not have access to the accumulation of specific moments that produced it. There had been the Saturday mornings when Devin came to pick up Isaiah for whatever activity had been arranged, and had always come on time, which Isaiah had noticed from a young age without having language for why it mattered. There had been the math competition in 9th grade when Devin had driven 3 hours round trip to watch Isaiah place second, and had said on the drive home, "What did you learn about first place?" Isaiah had said she was faster on the calculation setup. Devin had said correct. That's what you study next. Nothing about the loss, nothing about the placement, just the correct identification of the next problem. Isaiah had studied the calculation setup. He had placed first the following year. There had been the conversation 2 years ago when Isaiah was 14, when Devin had sat across from him at a diner booth and had said without preamble, "I need to tell you some things about what it means to be a young black man in this city, particularly when you are near police, and particularly when you are near something valuable that people have decided you do not belong with. I am going to tell you these things not because I want you to be afraid, but because I want you to be prepared, and there is a difference." Isaiah had listened. He had asked 3 questions. Devin had answered all 3. They had finished their food and gone to a movie and not talked about it again because it did not need to be talked about again. It had been said. It was in him. Devin was currently inside the pharmacy across the street handling something that had come up at the last moment and had left Isaiah in the car with the keys in the cup holder and the instruction, "Do not start it." You can sit in it. Do not start it. Isaiah had said, I know. He had been sitting in it for 4 minutes. He was thinking about the diner conversation from 2 years ago. He was not thinking about it because he was worried. He was thinking about it the way you think about something that was prepared in advance, when the situation that preparation was designed for has not yet arrived and may not arrive. But the memory of the preparation itself is present in the way that knowledge is present not as anxiety, but as resource. He was thinking about the way the interior smelled leather, and something faintly mechanical. The clean smell of a machine that had been built to do one thing and did it very well. He ran his hand along the steering wheel without putting pressure on it, feeling the texture of it, the way you feel something you are not yet allowed to use but have been given access to as a preliminary to eventually being allowed. He was 16. He did not have a license. He was not going to start the car. He was going to sit here until Devin came back and they were going to drive to the automotive show at the convention center, which was the actual purpose of the morning, and then they were going to get lunch somewhere. Devin had already picked out, and then Devin was going to drive him home, and Isaiah was going to have one of those Saturdays that you remember specifically not for any single dramatic event, but for the accumulation of ordinary, excellent things. He looked at Meridian Avenue through the windshield. The street was awake with Saturday morning traffic. A woman with a dog was crossing at the light. A delivery van was pulling away from the restaurant supply store at the corner. The morning light was the particular kind that late spring produces in this city before the heat sets in, when everything has a clean quality and the shadows are still long enough to have texture. The light hit the hood of the Corvette and broke into something electric at the leading edge, the way dark blue does in direct sun, going from almost black in the shadow of the door to a color that did not have a precise name because it was between blue and something more. He had his uncle's eyes, and his uncle's eyes noticed things like this. He noticed the way light fell on surfaces. He noticed the way the material of the seat curved to receive you when you sat down, the way the engineers had thought about the geometry of the human body and designed around it. He noticed the particular quality of the morning, which was good, which was the kind of morning that happens in May before the summer settles in and the heat makes everything slightly effortful. He noticed all of this with the attention of someone who was 16 and in no hurry and had nowhere to be for 45 minutes and was sitting in his uncle's Corvette on a Saturday morning with plans to go to an automotive show. He was happy. He would remember being happy. Specifically, precisely, correctly happy the way you are happy, when the thing you are doing is exactly the thing you wanted to be doing with exactly the person you wanted to be with at exactly the right time. Officer Glenn Marsh had been parked on the service road adjacent to Meridian Avenue for 12 minutes. He was 31 years old and had been on the force for 4 years. He had been assigned to this patrol section for 7 months since a shift in district coverage had reorganized the Saturday morning routes. He was not, by the official record, a problematic officer. He had 1 citizen complaint in 4 years, filed by a homeowner who believed he had been too slow to respond to a noise complaint which had been investigated and closed without finding. He had a satisfactory performance record, 2 commendations for community assistance calls, and the kind of institutional standing that does not produce warning flags and therefore does not produce review. He was not on a call. He was on patrol, which in this section of Meridian during Saturday morning meant watching the cross traffic and noting anything that fell outside the predictable pattern of the neighborhood. He had noted the Corvette. He had noted specifically the Corvette's occupant. He ran the plate. The plate was a paper dealer plate from Hargrove Certified Motors. The registration system did not have a direct entry for paper plates. They were temporary issued pending permanent registration. The system returned no record of theft or stolen vehicle. This was the correct result. The car had not been stolen. The system was telling him the truth. What he heard in that result, however, was not the truth as it was. What he heard was a confirmation of the conclusion he had already formed from the moment he had noted the Corvette's occupant, that the situation was irregular, that the irregularity was the person rather than the vehicle, and that no record was a different thing than nothing wrong. He ran it again. Same result. He got out of his car. He was not a bad officer by his own understanding of himself. He was a thorough one, following up on something that his assessment told him required follow-up. His assessment was wrong in its core premise and correct in its procedural form, which is the specific combination that makes situations like this one difficult to address and easy to repeat. He crossed to the Corvette. He came to the driver's side window. He looked at Isaiah, who had not yet noticed him coming because Isaiah had been looking at the morning light on Meridian Avenue and thinking about lunch. Isaiah looked up. He looked at Marsh. He did what 16 years of being raised by Robert and Latasha Whitfield had prepared him to do in any interaction with law enforcement. He placed both hands on the steering wheel where they were visible. He kept his voice level and he said, "Good morning." Marsh said, "Whose car is this?" Isaiah said, "My uncle's." Marsh said, "Where's your uncle?" Isaiah said, "In the pharmacy across the street. He'll be out in a few minutes." Marsh said, "You have ID." Isaiah said, "I have my school ID. I don't have a driver's license. I'm 16. He reached slowly for his back pocket, producing a wallet, and removed his school identification card. He held it out. Marsh took it. He looked at it. He looked at Isaiah. He said, "This car is reported stolen." Isaiah said, "It's not stolen. It's my uncle's car. He bought it 3 months ago. The dealer plate is from Hargrove Certified Motors. He's in the pharmacy right there." Marsh said, "Step out of the vehicle." Isaiah said, "My uncle is right across the street. If we wait 30 seconds, he'll come out and he can show you the registration." Marsh said, "I said, step out of the vehicle." His voice carried the particular texture of an authority accustomed to compliance without negotiation. Isaiah heard it. He understood what it meant. He understood the geometry of the situation with a precision that 16 years old should not have to produce, but that the specific circumstances of being a young black man in this city had been building in him since he was old enough to understand what his father was preparing him for during those careful, specific conversations at the kitchen table. He thought about the diner booth. He thought about Devin saying, "I want you to be prepared, and there is a difference." He thought about his father at the kitchen table, the specific version of the conversation that his father had given him, which was different from Devin's version in emphasis and similar in content. You are going to be in situations where the correct thing and the easy thing are not the same thing. The correct thing is to keep your hands visible, keep your voice level, give the accurate information, and do not give them anything that can be used to make the situation worse than it already is. He thought, this is the situation. He opened the door. He stepped out. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands visible at his sides. He was aware of the way his body looked from Marsh's perspective, tall for his age, dark complexioned, standing beside a car that cost more than most people's annual salary. He was aware that his awareness of this was itself part of what the preparation was for the ability to see the room from the outside while you were inside it, to understand what the person with the authority was perceiving, and to counter it not with argument, but with the steady accumulation of accurate information delivered in a register that left no room for escalation. Marsh said, "I'm going to need to see the registration for this vehicle." Isaiah said, "The registration is in the glove compartment. My uncle has it. He is across the street. His name is Devin Whitfield. He is the owner of this car." Marsh said, "How do I know you're not the one who took it?" Isaiah said very carefully, "Because I am 16 years old, and I am sitting in my uncle's car on a public street at 9:45 in the morning with the engine off waiting for him to come out of a pharmacy. That is the full account of what I have done." Marsh said the plate came back with no registration on record. Isaiah said, "It's a paper dealer plate. It's temporary. My uncle bought the car 3 months ago." Marsh said that's not how the system read it. Isaiah said, "Then the system may not fully account for temporary paper plates from a dealership. My uncle can show you the purchase documentation." Marsh was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Isaiah the way some officers look when the subject is saying things that are technically correct and they are determining how to proceed despite that correctness. He said, "Stay here." Isaiah said, "I'm not going anywhere." Marsh went back to his patrol vehicle. He called the situation in. He described the vehicle, the plate, the occupant. He did not mention that the occupant had offered to produce the owner immediately. He did not mention that the registration system's handling of paper plates was a known limitation. He requested backup. Isaiah stood on the sidewalk. He was looking at the pharmacy door across Meridian Avenue. He was counting seconds without counting them the way you count seconds when you are waiting for something and cannot allow the waiting to become anxiety. He was thinking about what his uncle had said in the diner 2 years ago. The prepared person is not the fearless person. The prepared person is the person who has converted the fear into something usable. Isaiah had been doing that conversion for the past 8 minutes, and it was working in the way that things you have practiced work when they are needed imperfectly and sufficiently. He was 16 years old, and he was standing on a public sidewalk in a city that had been his city since the day he was born, beside a car that belonged to his uncle, documented in a folder in the glove compartment, bought in a showroom 3 months ago by a man who was right now coming out of the pharmacy door across Meridian Avenue. Devin came through the door. Isaiah saw him and allowed himself a single internal breath of relief. Not visible, not an exhalation. A release of something internal, a small and precise adjustment in the cost of the last 8 minutes. He watched his uncle see him. He watched his uncle assess. He watched his uncle start moving. Across the street, Devin Whitfield came out of the pharmacy. He was 6'1", wearing a dark green jacket and khakis with the broad shoulders of someone who had rode crew for 4 years in college and had never fully shed the muscle. He had a pharmacy bag in one hand and his phone in the other, and he saw from the sidewalk across Meridian Avenue his 16-year-old nephew standing beside the Corvette on the curb with a police officer nearby and 2 hands held carefully at his sides. Devin did not run. He had also been prepared. He had spent 43 years being prepared for specific kinds of moments, and this was one of them, the moment when you see something across a street and you understand what it is before you have all the information, because you have enough information, because you have been accumulating this particular kind of information since you were old enough to understand what the accumulation was for. He had taught Isaiah what he knew. He had passed forward what had been passed to him, and now he was looking at his 16-year-old nephew standing on a sidewalk beside a car that belonged to Devin with a police officer nearby, and both of Isaiah's hands visible at his sides, and Devin knew precisely what had happened and precisely what was needed. What was needed was not speed. Speed communicated alarm. Speed in this situation could be misread. He needed to move with authority and without urgency, with the bearing of someone who is going where he belongs and knows it. He moved. He moved with the directed speed of a man who has assessed a situation completely from 50 yards and has decided what it requires of him. He crossed at the light. He was not running. He was crossing with the purposeful speed of someone for whom the light has become a formality. He was thinking about Isaiah's face, the way his nephew was standing, hands at his sides, posture straight, that particular stillness that Devin had tried to describe in the diner 2 years ago as the right kind of still rather than the frozen kind. Isaiah had found the right kind. He was doing it. He was 16 years old, and he was doing it correctly in a situation where doing it correctly cost him something, and Devin would not let himself think about what that cost meant yet. He would think about it later. Right now, he needed to be a man walking across Meridian Avenue with a pharmacy bag and documentation in a glove compartment. He came to the passenger side of the Corvette. He said, "Officer, my name is Devin Whitfield. I am the registered owner of this vehicle. My nephew is sitting in it with my permission while I was in the pharmacy. Is there a problem?" Marsh said, "I received a report of a suspicious vehicle and occupant." Devin said, "I bought this car 3 months ago at Hargrove Certified Motors. The dealer plate is temporary pending permanent registration, which is in process. I have the purchase documentation in the glove compartment." He opened the passenger door, reached into the glove compartment, and produced a folder. Inside were the purchase agreement, the temporary registration certificate, the insurance card, and the title transfer paperwork, all in the order a man who has done this before files them. He handed the folder to Marsh. Marsh took it. He read the top sheet. He read the second sheet. He looked at the car. He looked at Isaiah. He looked at Devin. At this point, a vehicle from Hargrove Certified Motors turned onto Meridian Avenue. This was not a coincidence and also was not planned. Hargrove Certified Motors used a geographic tracking system for their dealer-plated vehicles, a standard practice that allowed the dealership to verify that temporary plate vehicles were being operated within reasonable range of the point of sale during the temporary registration window. The system had flagged the vehicle's location as stationary on Meridian for 11 minutes and had dispatched a courtesy call. The courtesy call had reached the dealership's general manager, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had been in her office reviewing weekend sales reports. Sandra Okafor was 51 years old. She had been in automotive sales and management for 24 years, beginning as a floor salesperson at a Honda dealership in her late 20s and working her way through every management position the industry offered. Floor manager, finance director, general sales manager, and finally general manager at 4 different dealerships across 17 years before arriving at Hargrove Certified Motors. She had been the general manager here for 7 years. Under her management, customer satisfaction ratings had increased from the 63rd percentile to the 91st percentile in the regional ranking. Staff turnover had dropped by 30%. She had been offered 2 other positions in the past 3 years and had declined both because Hargrove Certified was doing what she wanted it to do. She knew her customers. This was not a figure of speech. She had built a practice of personally reviewing every transaction above a threshold value, not to approve or disapprove, but to know who was buying what and why, because the relationship between a dealership and a customer was not transactional in the way people assumed it was relational, and relationships required information. She had shaken Devin Whitfield's hand in the showroom 3 months ago and had walked him through the pre-delivery inspection herself because the Corvette was not a car you handed off at the end of a standard transaction checklist. It was a car that deserved to be given correctly. She drove a plain dealer logo sedan. She had been on Meridian Avenue for 60 seconds. She pulled up behind Marsh's patrol car. She got out. She walked to the group at the curb with the pace of someone who has been running a business for 24 years and has learned that the speed of your arrival communicates as much as anything you say. She said, "I'm Sandra Okafor. I'm the general manager of Hargrove Certified. Officer, this vehicle was sold to Mr. Devin Whitfield 3 months ago. I handled the sale personally. The paper plate is ours. The vehicle is fully registered in Mr. Whitfield's name. Is there something I can help clarify?" Marsh looked at her. He looked at the folder in his hand. He looked at Isaiah, who was standing with his hands at his sides and his face in the particular expression of a 16-year-old who is working very hard at composure because it is what was asked of him. Marsh said the system returned no record on the plate. Sandra said temporary paper plates are not always searchable in the standard traffic system. That's a known limitation. We maintain our own records and can verify the sale instantly. If you'd like, I can pull up the transaction on my phone right now. Marsh said that won't be necessary. He handed the folder back to Devin. He said the situation appears to be resolved. He said it in the register of someone who has determined that the evidence does not support the conclusion he arrived with, and is retreating from that conclusion in the specific way that people retreat from conclusions that have structural support. Not quickly, not with acknowledgement of what the conclusion had cost the people it had been applied to, but with the passive announcement that the thing he believed to be a problem had stopped being a problem, framed as resolution, not as error. The situation had not changed. Isaiah had been a 16-year-old boy sitting in his uncle's legitimately purchased car with the engine off since 9:45 that morning. That had been true at 9:45, and it was true now. What had changed was not the truth. What had changed was the weight of the context pressing against Marsh's conclusion until the conclusion could no longer hold its own structure. Devin took the folder. He looked at Marsh for exactly 3 seconds with the eyes of a man who has a 16-year-old nephew and a Corvette and a civil engineering firm and 43 years of being black in this city, and who is deciding what the next sentence is going to be. He had several options. He was choosing between them with the speed and precision of someone who has had to make this kind of decision many times and has learned that the decision is not about justice. In this moment, justice was a different room, but about efficiency, about getting his nephew into the car and moving about converting this curb on Meridian Avenue from a site of confrontation back into a street on a Saturday morning. He said, "Thank you for clarifying." He said it with the particular stillness of someone who is holding the accurate version of that sentence for a different room. The different room would come. The complaint would be the different room. Patricia Cole's office on Wednesday would be the different room. The correct sentence would be used there in the form of a 4-page account and a formal filing where it would do what it needed to do. He turned to Isaiah. He said, "You all right?" Isaiah said, "Yeah, Uncle Dev, I'm all right." Devin looked at his nephew. He looked at the way Isaiah was standing, hands at his sides. Voice level, composure intact, and something moved through his face that was complicated and quiet, and not entirely resolved. He had taught Isaiah to do exactly this. He had taught him because he had to, because the world required it, because the alternative to teaching it was leaving his nephew unprepared. And leaving his nephew unprepared was not something Devin was willing to do. He had taught it, and Isaiah had learned it. And the fact that Isaiah had needed it today at 16 on a Saturday morning, when the plan had been the automotive show and a good lunch, that fact had a weight that Devin was going to feel later. Not now. Later. When he was not standing in front of a police officer and a general manager on a curb on Meridian Avenue. He was proud of Isaiah in a way that he did not yet have the exact words for, and he was going to find those words later, and he was going to say them because some things needed to be said even when they were difficult to say correctly. He was also something else. He was holding the something else in the place he always held it, which was behind the practical requirements of the situation. Filed. For later. He said, "Get in." Isaiah got in. Devin looked at Sandra. He said, "Thank you for coming." She said, "I'm sorry it was necessary." He said, "So am I." He got in. He sat for a moment before starting the engine. He put his hands on the steering wheel in the 10-2 position, which was not the way he normally drove, and he looked at the dashboard for a few seconds with the focused stillness of someone who is making the transition from one internal state to another, and is doing it deliberately. He thought about Isaiah standing on the sidewalk. He thought about the 2 years since the diner booth. He thought about what it meant that the preparation had worked and what it cost that the preparation had been necessary. He allowed himself to feel both of those things fully for exactly 10 seconds. Then he moved one into the same file where he kept everything that needed to go there for later. The other he let stay present because some things should stay present. The thing that stays present was pride. He started the engine. The V8 produced the particular sound of something that is very well built, doing exactly what it was built to do. He pulled out onto Meridian Avenue. Isaiah looked out the window. He said, "How did she get here that fast?" Devin said, "Dealer tracking on the plate." Isaiah said she came because of a tracking system. Devin said she came because she knew the car, and she knew it was ours. The tracking system told her where we were. She decided what it meant. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. He was looking out the window at Meridian Avenue going past. He was watching the street the way you watch a street when you are processing something and the movement outside gives your eyes a place to go while your mind works. He had been prepared for this. He had also not been fully prepared for this because preparation and experience are not the same thing, and the experience of standing beside a car on a public street at 9:45 in the morning and being told it was stolen was something that no amount of kitchen table conversation fully captures until it has actually happened to you. The preparation had worked. He had done exactly what he was supposed to do. He had kept his hands visible. He had kept his voice level. He had given the accurate information. What the preparation had not captured was the specific feeling of doing all of that correctly, and having it not immediately matter of presenting the truth and watching it be disregarded not because it was untrue, but because the person receiving it had made a prior decision that the truth was not going to be allowed to revise. That feeling was its own education. He was 16 and he had just received it. He said the officer said the car was stolen. Devin said the system said no record. The system was wrong, and the system's limitation gave him a document to stand behind. Isaiah said the system told him what to see. Devin said yes. Isaiah said, and he already knew what he was going to see before he got out of the car. Devin looked at him. He said yes. That's the one that takes longer to fix. The system limitation is a technical problem. There's a process for that. What you just identified, the decision made before the information was received, that's a different kind of problem. It's older. It's more resistant to the kind of fixes that work on technical problems. Isaiah said, can it be fixed? Devin said it can be worked on. It has been worked on. Progress is real, and it is not fast, and it is not sufficient, and it is still progress. The complaint your father is going to file tomorrow adds to that progress. The record your father is going to make adds to it. Every time someone documents what happened accurately and puts it somewhere official, it adds. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like enough, but it adds. Isaiah was quiet for the rest of the block. Then he said, what do you do with that? Devin said you do what you did. You put your hands where they can see them. You keep your voice level. You give them the accurate information. And then you go to the automotive show with your uncle, and you eat a good lunch, and you come home, and you tell your father exactly what happened, and you let him tell you what to do next. That's the sequence. That's what we do. Isaiah said, what does Dad do next? Devin said your father calls his brother, and his brother has an attorney, and the attorney files the appropriate complaint, and the record of what happened today goes into a file that adds to the pattern and does what accurate records are supposed to do, which is be there when they're needed. Isaiah said, does it help? Devin was quiet for a beat. He thought about what it meant to answer this question honestly to a 16-year-old who had just spent 20 minutes on a sidewalk doing everything correctly and still needed a dealership manager to drive across town to confirm what he had already told the officer. He said it helps more than saying nothing. It doesn't fix everything, but it helps more than saying nothing. And saying nothing is not an option we have. Saying nothing is not something our family does. Isaiah looked at Meridian Avenue going past the window. The morning light had moved. The long spring shadows had shortened. The delivery van was gone from the corner. A different set of people was crossing at the light. He said the car is really fast. Devin said, I know. He said, how fast? Devin said, that's a question for when you're 18 and have a license and I've decided whether I trust you. Isaiah said, you trust me. Devin said, I know I trust you. I'm deciding whether I trust the insurance premiums. Isaiah laughed. It was a short laugh, the laughter of someone who has been holding composure for 20 minutes and has found the release valve. It was the right sound for the car on the right morning, on the right street, going somewhere they had planned to go. It was the laugh of a 16-year-old who had done something hard and was now, for the first time since 9:45, doing something easy. Devin heard it, and something in his chest released. He had been holding his own version of the something else since he crossed Meridian Avenue and seen Isaiah standing on the sidewalk. He had been holding it through the documentation exchange, through the conversation with Marsh, through Sandra Okafor's arrival and the necessary courtesies of that interaction, through the drive away from the curb and the first block of Meridian, and the conversation about the system and the record and what you do with it. He had been holding it with the particular practice of a man who has had 43 years of practice at holding things correctly without allowing them to spill into the immediate situation where they would be unhelpful. Now Isaiah had laughed, and the laugh was the signal that the crisis had passed in the way that matters most, not officially but internally, the way a patient's color changes when the medication starts working. And Devin allowed himself to release a small portion of what he had been holding. Not all of it. He was going to hold some of it for a long time. He was going to be angry specifically and precisely about what had happened to his nephew on a Saturday morning on Meridian Avenue, and that anger was going to go into the complaint and the documentation and the follow-up, and every conversation he had with Robert in the weeks ahead about what came next. That anger was a resource. He was not going to waste it on the car ride. He merged onto the highway. The Corvette settled into the lane with the ease of something that was exactly what it was designed to be. The V8 produced a sound at highway speed that was different from the sound at the curb, quieter in one register, more present in another, the sound of managed power rather than contained power. Isaiah turned toward the window and watched the highway move. They drove in comfortable silence for 4 miles. It was the silence of two people who know each other well enough to understand that not every moment needs to be filled with language. Then Devin said the automotive show has 3 full-size restoration projects from the 1960s. One of them is a Shelby Cobra that somebody found in a barn in 1997 and spent 11 years bringing back. Isaiah said 11 years. Devin said they documented every piece, every fastener. They kept a photograph of every component before and after. Isaiah said, why 11 years? Devin said, because they wanted to do it correctly. And correct for that car took 11 years. Isaiah thought about this. He said, I want to see the documentation. Devin said, I know you do. They have a book. Isaiah said they printed a book. Devin said 400 pages. Isaiah turned from the window. He said, okay, now I'm actually excited about today. Devin said, I knew you would be. They drove the rest of the way to the automotive show. The highway merged into the surface streets near the convention center. Devin found parking on the second level of the structure adjacent to the main entrance. He turned off the engine and they sat for a moment in the quiet that follows an engine stopping when the mechanical sounds drain away and the ambient sounds of the environment take their place. In this case, the parking structure's particular echo and the distant sound of traffic and the closer sound of other people's car doors. Devin said, you did everything right. Isaiah said, I know. Devin said, I need you to actually know that, not just say it. Isaiah said, I actually know it. I know what right looked like, and I did it. The problem was not what I did. The problem was what was done to me before I had a chance to do anything. Devin looked at him. Isaiah said, those are different problems. You taught me that. Devin said, yes. He said, I'm proud of you. Isaiah said, I know that too. Devin said, good. He opened his door. Isaiah opened his. They walked to the automotive show together in the morning light, which was still good, which was still the particular quality of late spring, before the heat settles in, and they spent 2 hours looking at engines and documentation and the restored Shelby Cobra and the 400-page book, and then they ate a good lunch, and then Devin drove him home, and Isaiah told his father exactly what happened in order precisely. The formal complaint was filed the following Wednesday. Isaiah's father, Robert Whitfield, a construction foreman with 21 years in the trade, and the exact same hands as his son, sat at the kitchen table with the attorney, a woman named Patricia Cole, who had handled 3 civil rights matters in the past 2 years and knew what pattern documentation looked like and how to file it to maximum effect, and they went through the account in order. Robert had typed out Isaiah's account the night of the incident, sitting with Isaiah at the kitchen table, while Latasha brought coffee, and the 3 of them went through it sentence by sentence. Robert had asked Isaiah to be precise. Isaiah had been precise. The account was 4 pages, and it did not contain a single exaggeration. Robert Whitfield had worked construction for 21 years. He was a foreman at a mid-sized general contracting firm, the kind of job that required him to be precise about materials and timelines, and the specific difference between a thing done correctly and a thing done approximately. He had built that precision across 2 decades of work that held or failed based on whether the right information had been applied at the right moment. He brought the same precision to everything outside the work. He brought it to the homework. He brought it to the school conferences. He brought it to the kitchen table conversations that prepared his son for a world that was going to test him in ways that no amount of love alone could address. He had sat with Isaiah the night of the incident and taken the account, not recording it with his phone, writing it, longhand in a yellow legal pad the way he had learned from his own father, because handwritten notes make you slow down enough to be accurate. He had asked Isaiah to describe events in the order they happened, not the order they felt important. He had asked Isaiah to describe what he did and what he said separately from what he felt. He had asked him to describe the physical facts, the car, the street, the time, the officer's approaches and statements, his own responses. Devin's arrival, Sandra Okafor's arrival, the documentation that was produced. He had asked Isaiah whether he felt threatened. Isaiah had thought about this carefully and said, "I felt like the situation was not going to resolve itself correctly without someone else arriving." Robert had written that down word for word because it was precise. Latasha Whitfield had sat at the other end of the table during this process and had not said anything except to bring coffee. Once refill it once and ask Isaiah one question. "Are you all right?" Isaiah had said yes. She had put her hand on his shoulder for 3 seconds, and then she had gone back to the other end of the table, and she had been very quiet in the way that someone is quiet when they are managing something that they are not going to let interfere with what the room needs to accomplish. Patricia Cole read the 4-page account and said, "This is well documented. Robert said my son is precise. We raised him that way." She said it shows. She spent 40 minutes with Robert going through the account and asking follow-up questions. She asked about the specific language Marsh had used when he asked Isaiah to exit the vehicle. She asked about the timeline, how many minutes between Isaiah's first offer of information and Devin's arrival from across the street. She asked whether Isaiah had said specifically that the owner was across the street before Marsh called for backup. Robert said yes. It's in the account. 3rd page, 2nd paragraph. She found it. She read it. She wrote a note. She filed the complaint the following Wednesday with the City Civil Rights Office and with the Police Department's Internal Affairs Division attaching Isaiah's account. Devin Whitfield's purchase documentation. Sandra Okafor's written statement confirming the sale and the dealership's tracking record, showing the vehicle's legitimate ownership and the traffic system's own documentation of the limitation that had produced the no-record result on the paper plate search. The complaint specifically noted that Officer Marsh had requested Isaiah exit the vehicle before seeking clarification from the owner who had been available across the street and who had been identified by Isaiah at the time of first contact. The complaint noted that Marsh's incident report filed the same day did not mention that the owner had been present and available, and that Marsh had not noted in the report that Isaiah had identified the owner's location before Marsh called for backup. The omission in the report was documented in the complaint with a precise timeline showing the sequence of events as recorded in Isaiah's account, Devin's account, and Sandra Okafor's account. The Internal Affairs review took 3 weeks. The reviewer was a lieutenant named Carol Simmons, 19 years on the Force 7 in Internal Affairs. She had handled 63 reviews in her 7 years in the division. She read the complaint, the accounts, the documentation, and Marsh's incident report. She read Marsh's incident report twice, specifically looking at what was present and what was absent. The incident report did not mention that the vehicle owner had been identified by the subject across the street during the first contact. It did not mention that the owner had crossed to the vehicle within 3 minutes of Marsh's approach. It did not mention Sandra Okafor or her statement. It described the stop as stopped vehicle with paper plate returning no record subject. Asked to exit, vehicle owner arrived and produced documentation, situation resolved. The report was not factually false. It was factually incomplete in ways that compressed the sequence of events into a shape that did not accurately reflect what had happened. Lieutenant Simmons noted this in her review with the specific language material omissions that affect the interpretive record of the stop. She reviewed the traffic system documentation regarding paper plate searches and found the limitation Marsh had encountered. The limitation was real. She noted it in the review and issued a separate recommendation to the Traffic System Management Office for protocol update officers. Should be aware that paper dealer plates issued by certified dealerships may return no record without indicating theft status. She also noted that Marsh had asked the 16-year-old subject to exit the vehicle before seeking verification from the owner who had been identified as available across the street. She noted that this sequence escalation before verification was inconsistent with the department's own vehicle stop protocol, which specified when ownership can be verified by available parties. Verification should be sought before requiring subject exit. At the end of the review, Officer Marsh received a formal written reprimand for the handling of the stop and a mandatory enrollment in the department's Vehicle Stop Protocol training program. The reprimand noted specifically, Officer failed to seek available verification before escalating the stop to a vehicle exit request. The training program focused on the handling of temporary registration documents and the appropriate sequence of verification before escalation. Sandra Okafor sent a written statement to the City Civil Rights Office independently confirming the sale, the plate, and the tracking system's record. She had not been asked to do this. Patricia Cole had not requested it. She had done it because she had been a witness, and witnesses who do not document what they witnessed allow the record to be incomplete, and she had not spent 24 years building something at the level of accuracy she had built it to start being comfortable with incomplete records. She sent a letter to Devin Whitfield. The letter said, "I am sorry for what your nephew experienced. He handled an unjust situation with a composure that should not have been required of him. If there is anything Hargrove Certified can do to support your complaint, please let us know. We will." She sent a second letter addressed to Isaiah directly. This was not a standard business action. She had thought about it for 2 days before doing it. She had decided to do it because the letter to Devin covered the official and the practical, and Isaiah deserved something that was addressed to him and not to his uncle or his father. He was the one who had been on the sidewalk. He was the one who had kept his hands visible and his voice level and given the accurate information for 8 minutes alone. He was 16. She thought 16 deserved its own letter. She had also, the week after the incident, convened a brief staff meeting at Hargrove Certified and reviewed the tracking system's notification protocol with her team. She had said, when the system flags one of our plates, "I want to know within 2 minutes." I drove to Meridian Avenue in a dealer sedan on a Saturday morning because I happened to be in my office. I want to know in 2 minutes so that I can make a better decision about what the response should be. The tracking system notification window was reduced from 30 minutes to 8 minutes by the end of the week. She did not announce this publicly. She did not seek credit for it. She simply did it because doing it was the accurate response to what she had learned on that Saturday morning, and accurate responses to learning are what people who build things that last are supposed to produce. She had been in automotive management for 24 years, and she had learned across those years a version of the same thing that Robert Whitfield had learned in construction and Devin Whitfield had learned in civil engineering, and Arthur Caldwell had learned in structural work. The structure is only as reliable as the honesty of the people responsible for it. You can have the correct materials and the correct design and the correct procedure and still produce a flawed structure if the people executing the process are not honest about what they know, about what they don't know, about what the system is doing versus what they thought it was doing. Honesty is not a virtue in this context. It is a load-bearing component. She ran Hargrove Certified as though it were a load-bearing structure. The people who worked for her understood this. They understood it because she modeled it, and what you model is what people learn, and what people learn is what your institution becomes. Isaiah kept the letter. He had not expected a letter. He had known about the formal complaint because his father had explained the process to him the same way his father explained everything, which was accurately and in order. He had known about the review because Robert had told him when it opened and when it concluded, and what the outcome was. He had not known about Sandra Okafor's letter until it arrived in the mail addressed to him by name, not to his father, to Isaiah James Whitfield, in a plain envelope with the Hargrove Certified Motors return address in the upper left corner. He had opened it at the kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon. He had read it twice. He had not said anything to anyone for a few minutes. Then he had gone to his room, folded it precisely, and put it in the drawer of his desk where he kept the things he considered worth keeping: his school achievement certificates, the photograph from the regional math competition where he had placed second and subsequently first, the note his grandmother had sent him when he made honor roll the first time, the bookmark his Aunt Cynthia had given him when he finished the first book she had recommended to him at age 12. He put Sandra Okafor's letter with those things between the math competition photograph and the grandmother's note. He thought about what the letter had done that the formal review outcome had not done by itself. The review outcome said that Officer Marsh had been wrong and would be trained and had a reprimand in his file. That was institutional. That was the system correcting the system which mattered. Sandra Okafor's letter was personal. It said, "I am sorry for what your nephew experienced." It said he handled an unjust situation with a composure that should not have been required of him. It came from a person who had been there, who had seen it, who had not been required to write anything, and had written it anyway because she thought it was right to do so. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about what it meant when someone who did not have to do a thing did it anyway because it was right. He thought about the connection between that and the kind of engineer his uncle was, the kind of foreman his father was, the kind of person his grandmother was when she wrote notes to a 12-year-old about honor roll. He was 16 years old. He was still learning what the word integrity meant at the cellular level, below the definition where it lived in behavior rather than language. He was learning it from a lot of sources. Sandra Okafor had just become one of them. He was 16 years old. He had sat in a Corvette on a Saturday morning and been told he had stolen it. He had put his hands on the steering wheel where they were visible. He had kept his voice level. He had given the accurate information. And then he had gone to the automotive show and spent 2 hours looking at the restored Shelby Cobra and the 400-page documentation book, and had asked 3 questions of the restoration team that were specific enough that the team lead had looked at him for a moment and then had answered them as though he were an adult. And then he had eaten a good lunch. And then he had come home and told his father exactly what happened. The record was now accurate. He had gone back to the automotive show the following Saturday on his own with the bus pass his mother had loaded for the month. He had spent another hour with the documentation book. The team lead had been there again. He had remembered Isaiah. He had said, "You're back." Isaiah had said yes. He had said the book has 212 photographs and 200 separate component logs. Isaiah had said, "I know. I read the captions last time." He wants to understand the sourcing decisions. The team lead had sat down next to him, and they had talked for 40 minutes about the decisions behind which components were restored versus replaced, and what the documentation philosophy had been, and what it meant to bring a thing back to its original state when some of what that original state had been was gone and could not be recovered. Could not be. Isaiah had asked, "What do you do about the parts you can't find?" The team lead had said, "You document the gap. You say this component is unavailable, and this is what we substituted, and this is why the substitute is the closest available match. You don't pretend the gap isn't there. You document it, and you explain the decision, and you let the record show what was done and why." Isaiah had thought about that for a long time. He thought about it when he put Sandra Okafor's letter in the drawer. He thought about it when he read the outcome of the complaint review. He thought about what it meant to document the gap, to say this thing happened, this is what was done, this is the closest available match to a remedy. This is what the record now shows. The morning light on Meridian Avenue had been excellent. He remembered it specifically, the way it fell on the hood of the dark blue Corvette going electric at the edge where the sun caught it. He remembered thinking he was happy. He had been right. He had been interrupted from being happy for 20 minutes, and then he had been happy again, and the interruption was in the record, and the happiness was in the record, and both of them were true. He was still right. What you do when it costs you something is what you actually believe. He had heard that somewhere or several places, because it was the kind of thing that people who understood something important tended to say in different versions. His father said it one way. Devin said it another way. His grandmother said it without words, in the way she did everything that mattered, which was to demonstrate it and trust him to understand the demonstration. He had been tested. He had stayed in his seat. He had kept his hands visible. He had given the accurate information. That was not everything. The accurate information alone had not been sufficient. It had taken Devin crossing the street, and Sandra Okafor arriving in a dealer sedan, and Patricia Cole filing a complaint, and Robert Whitfield's handwriting on a legal pad. It had taken the documentation and the review and the reprimand and the protocol recommendation and the letter in the drawer. It had taken all of that, but it had started with him staying in his seat and keeping his hands visible and giving the accurate information. That was the beginning of everything else, and the beginning mattered. You had to get the beginning right. Everything that comes after depends on what you do first. He thought about the Shelby Cobra at the automotive show. The team lead had said you document the gap. You don't pretend it isn't there. You show what was done and why, and you let the record reflect the decision accurately. He thought about what it meant that a restoration team and a civil rights complaint and a 16-year-old boy standing on a sidewalk with his hands visible were all doing the same thing in their different ways in their different rooms. They were all trying to produce an accurate record of what had happened and what had been done about it so that the record could be used when it was needed. Isaiah Whitfield was 16 years old. He was going to be an engineer of some kind. He had not decided exactly what kind, but the pull toward material science was strong and getting stronger, and he thought about load-bearing structures and gap documentation, and the relationship between honesty and structural integrity more than most 16-year-olds thought about those things. He had reasons for that. The reasons were not all comfortable. The reasons included a Saturday morning on Meridian Avenue, and a letter in a desk drawer, and a crossword with an answer in pencil that would be inked later. He would ink it. He was very sure of the answer. Some answers you are uncertain about, and you pencil them lightly and check the crosses and revise if the crosses tell you something different. Some answers you know with the specific certainty that comes from understanding the structure of the problem deeply enough that the answer is not a guess, but a conclusion. Those you write in ink. You commit to them, you circle them, you move to the next clue. He was going to be a materials engineer. He was fairly sure of that now. He was going to study the way structures held under load and failed under stress and the molecular logic of both. He was going to be precise and thorough and honest about what the measurements said, regardless of what he had expected the measurements to say. He was going to document the gaps when gaps existed and specify the substitutions when substitutions were necessary, and let the record show what was done and why. He had some reasons for that had nothing to do with automotive shows or crosswords or 400-page restoration books. He had a Saturday morning on Meridian Avenue, and the 20 minutes he had spent on a sidewalk with his hands visible, converting fear into something usable. He had a letter in a desk drawer from a woman who had driven across town in a dealer sedan because she saw something that needed to be corrected. He had a father who wrote things down in longhand on a yellow legal pad because handwriting makes you slow enough to be accurate. He had two kinds of hands that were his uncle's hands and his father's hands, and both of those men had spent decades building things that held. He was going to build things that held. That was not a small thing. That was the whole thing. Subscribe our channel. We find the record and we read what it says.